A lot of our students struggle with social skills, but how can we teach social skills in a way that's meaningful to our learners, especially the ones that have a lot of expressive language? How can we go beyond basic contingency management to help our learners contact their own values?
Hi, I'm Shira.
And I'm Shayna.
We're behavior analysts that create weekly content about how to teach kids with autism so that they make real progress. And we create shareable resources to make your job just a little easier. Today's topic is all about ACT-based social skills. And if you want more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on new video releases.
Okay, so just a little confession to make. We really weren't in the mood to do some podcast recording today. It's hard for us sometimes. You wake up late. We did a CEU presentation last night until 10 p.m. and I didn't sleep very well. I was exhausted and I actually dreamt about giving webinars. So I got to Shira's today and it was like, well, do we have to do this? Are we recording today? But then we were reminded of our values and we were reminded of why we're doing this in the first place. And yes, we're putting out these podcasts for you. And that's really what our reinforcement is disseminating information. So we're really able to do something hard because it's meaningful and in line with our values.
And this is really, another level in terms of teaching social skills. We have talked about teaching social skills on, a more basic or beginner level in one of our blogs about how to teach those social skills. But I think we all have a lot of those learners who need to go beyond basic contingency management, how it's not enough to just tell them to do or, perform a certain behavior or a certain skill that we call social in order to access some sort of reinforcement. We have learners who even go beyond, basic functions of behavior in terms of why they're engaging in certain social skills or not engaging in certain social skills. So, we've started exploring a little bit more about ACT. ACT is something that stands for acceptance and commitment therapy. It is rooted in something called relational frame theory, RFT, which is something we are familiar with as BCBAs. And what that means is it's about indirect experiences or, sometimes just verbal statements can affect our behavior without, exactly coming in contact with that contingency. What that means in terms of relational frame theory is if I can learn that A equals B and B equals C, then I can derive that relationship that A equals C. Okay.
Mark Dixon puts it really well in one of his trainings. Mark Dixon says, listen, who here has heard of a Mexican walking? Oh, he says, who here has heard of an oxalotl? And everyone's like, well, what's an oxalotl? He says, well, what if I were to tell you that an oxalotl is a Mexican walking fish? And then he says, okay, now that I've said, an oxalotl is a Mexican walking fish, what can you derive from that? Where do you think an oxalotl lives? Mexico, right? Do you think, where do you think it lives in water, on land, and sea? Do you think it's got some feet? Do you think it's got a tail? And you can derive all of these inferences just based on that one piece of information he's given you. So that's a nice example.
And also you've learned that not because you've been to Mexico, not because you've seen the fish, but because you have the language. And so another quote from Mark Dixon is that once people start talking and really talking, we're talking about a little more about abstract language, a little more about verbal thoughts and behavior, then traditional behavior analysis interventions sometimes fail. So, we're talking about in terms of building skills that require abstract thought, that they can learn from indirect experiences. So this is, the learner who's kind of gone beyond some of the basic contingencies. And so when we use ACT, we are talking about building psychological flexibility for our learners. I don't know about you guys, but I have a lot of learners who one of their biggest challenges is that inflexibility. It's a very common symptom of ASD, but even not with ASD, I'm sometimes rigid. We all have a little bit of rigidity, and ACT talks about just as being a healthy human being, having healthy well-being requires some psychological flexibility. How many of us get, so frustrated when our schedules change at the last minute or when things don't go our way, and it just becomes frustration. But we can also benefit from a little bit more psychological flexibility.
I'm laughing because I'm making an internal note to myself, Shayna, be less rigid when your schedule changes. It's okay. Be flexible. Take a deep breath. You got this.
So that would be something like, acceptance. Accept it for what it is. The other parts of ACT talk about being in the present moment, diffusion, self as context, committed action, and values. And those are all 6 dimensions that contribute to psychological flexibility. We do have a whole nother podcast on ACT and AIM that we're going to link to here, where you can get some more information just on the topics of ACT. AIM is a really great curriculum that was developed by Mark Dixon and Dana Palalunas, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, which combines mindfulness, ACT, and ABA to teach psychological flexibility within that context of the Hexaflex. So what's really great about AIM is it takes everything, like in theory, yeah, it's great to have psychological flexibility. These 6 dimensions are really great, but how do I teach it? And it puts it all into a really nice curriculum. I use this often in classrooms to guide our social skills lessons. We definitely adapt and make changes, but we'll use the AIM curriculum very often as a springboard for some of our social skills lessons and some of that language that you can incorporate into the lessons as well. The language referring to acceptance, referring to committed action. Each lesson focuses on a different area of that hexaplex.
Sure, you're going to delve into this a little bit more in a webinar that's coming up, right?
Yeah, we're going to get really into teaching social skills using an ACT-based approach on our webinar on Thursday, November 16th at 12 p.m. for our members. And it's going to be live and recorded, so you can watch it at any time. But I'm really excited about sharing some of the stuff that we've been working on within ACT and AIM and some of the other curriculums that we're using, because there's such a need for social skills in a values-based way, and not just, share your toy because you're going to get a token, or take a turn because you get, an M&M. They're not getting to all the verbal components of language and why we should do hard things, really, because it's worth it in the long run.
So 20 years ago, I was teaching a social skills class, and I was taught to teach social skills classes with reinforcement. Obviously, you need to start somewhere. And we used to have empty bowls in front of students. And keep in mind, this is 20, even 25 years ago. I'm dating myself a little bit, but we were teaching. And, every time the student raised their hand, whatever their pinpoint was, we didn't call it a pinpoint back then, but whatever their target behavior was, whether it was raising their hand, whether it was answering correctly, whether it was making, body facing speaker with, various conversation skills, whatever it was, when they did that, we would put a piece of popcorn in their bowl. So first of all, reinforcement wasn't differentiated because everyone got popcorn regardless whether they liked it or not. And secondly, it was edibles, and they're working for edibles. And then we were able to fade that out, and then they got points, but we were never able to fade out those points. We were never able to, fade that to a point where it's like, well, I'm just doing this because I want to do this. I know it might be hard to interact, but I want to do this because my end goal is having a friend. We never got to that point. It was always like, I'm doing this because I'm getting some type of external reinforcement. So, everything to do with ACT and basing things on your values versus, hey, 20 years ago, I'm doing this because why? Why again? Remind me. I love how far our field has come.
And we, used to run similar social skills groups, and it's not a huge jump from saying, in the groups, we would say, you need to talk on topic with your friends, and you need to share the item or activity. The small difference is that instead of doing it because I said so, let's talk about why you should do it, because what value are you tapping into? So for example, we would get a certain student who came to a bunch of our groups, and we would run those groups that way, and it wasn't making much progress. And then we took this kind of approach, and we would work with him, and we started by identifying his values. And one of his values really was, making friends. And so we took that value, and his other value was playing video games, and he really liked playing video games. And so what sometimes happened was he would play video games by himself because that value kind of, won the other value over. It was just more reinforcing, because making friends was hard. Right? It was hard for him. So he ended up playing video games alone. And so we would go through one of the ACT planners that we're going to share with you today in terms of identifying his value and helping him take committed action towards that value. So talking about, can you commit to certain things in your life and try to help you get to your values? And so we would work on certain actions that he could take to invite friends over with him to play video games together. There's so many options now for playing video games, virtually with friends and having those online communities, if that's a value for him. So that was one example. We've also done it with some of our younger students who their value might be something more tangible, like a reinforcer. And that's okay. Maybe they do want that prize at the end of the week because that's really valuable for them. And you know what, for some of our younger learners, like that's a value for most kids is the ice cream that they get at the end of the week. And so you can use any of these lessons to create, some sort of token economy, but that's based on showing certain behaviors that are in line with the Hexaflex. So if they're showing things like diffusing from their thoughts, accepting present moment, certain like mindfulness activities, then these can contribute to some level of, an economy that they can still work for tangible reinforcers, but it's incorporating pieces of the flexibility as opposed to just do it because I said so, take that turn because I said so, but it's building different skills. Another curriculum that we've been working on in social skills is called DNAV. That stands for Discoverer, Noticer, Advisor, and the V is values. So this also takes the attitude of that all things that all lead us to things we care about, which are our values. So the noticer is the part of us that's aware of our body's feelings and our sensory and everything that we're actually experiencing. So with every one of our social skills lessons, we'll always do a noticer activity. And those are different activities in a way that you can incorporate mindfulness, you can incorporate, your body in space or feeling certain sensory feelings so that we practice having that perception of what our body and our senses are feeling. The A stands for the advisor, which is that voice in your head that's kind of telling you what to do. So it might be telling you to, push the friend beside you, or it might be telling you to wiggle in your chair, whatever it's telling you to do. Just be aware that that's an advisor. It's a voice in your head. So this is a little bit of the fusion that we're talking about within the Hexaflex. So notice that you don't have to be fused to that. It's just a little voice. And so we'll do lessons about the advisor and characterizing it and turning it into someone who we can notice so that we don't have to identify with it. The D stands for discoverer, and that's the part of you that will try new things, is willing to explore the world and discover the world. And imagine how much more flexible our kids would be if we just discovered more things in our world. So once you can kind of incorporate all those things and do different activities that touch on each one of those pieces, they can all lead us to things that we care about, which are our values. So if you can identify your value and start to work on noticing how your body is feeling, noticing the thoughts that are coming in your head, and noticing whether you're willing to try something, then you can work closer and closer to your value. So we'll run groups based on DNAV. There's a fantastic curriculum out of the UK. It's called Connect, and we'll often use that. It goes for any ages, and it has tons of lesson plans, which are really great. We edit them and individualize them a little bit, but they're really great for running groups. We can link that here in the show notes. And we use this for all ages, and then we'll adapt it and we'll bring in real life examples and we'll model our own flexibility and our own maybe even frustration when things don't go our way. And we'll practice with our kids how, we'll almost talk out loud because we're practicing having that advisor voice in our head, but then discovering like, what would happen if I did it anyway? Or what would happen if I did something hard? Would I feel good about that? So these are all different, ways that we have been practicing getting to that higher level thinking within social skills groups and really helping those kids who they do have values. They might not be those tangible reinforcers or the escape maintain behavior that we're used to, but we have to really tap into all those values and figure out how can we help our learners get closer to those values. And I find, especially with social skills, let them tell you what their values are. You know what? It might not be to make friends. It might be to be left alone. It might be to have some time by myself. It might be to play more video games, but we can only help our students get closer to their own values when we know what those are instead of, imposing our own value system on some of our learners.
So join us for our webinar on Thursday, November 16th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when Shira is going to be discussing more teaching social skills using ACT, which I'm really excited about as well. And if you're listening to this podcast after the fact, the recording will be available in our membership.
And for more information on teaching social skills with ACT, click the link on or around this video or in the description to claim your free ACT Committed Actions Planner. We also encourage you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos and leave a like and comment below if you have further questions.